What's up, you guys? Justin Rivas here, wanting to talk to you about this. Yeah, the Panasonic G85 versus the Panasonic G7. I'm getting questions, tons in the comments. Should I just get the G7 or should I save my pennies and get the G85? Obviously, if money's no issue, sure, get the G85. But for lots of us, we have to make these tough decisions. So I want to walk through a few different scenarios. And I will just preface this by saying, if you're a beginner just getting into photography or videography, and this is like your first kind of real camera, honestly, just get the G7. Because lots of the things about the G85 that could be handy or would be nice, you have so many other things to learn. It's just true that taking advantage of a little bit more smoother shots for video, or a slightly redesigned shutter mechanism or things like that, they're not going to matter to you because you have a lot of fundamentals to learn. And so I would say just start with the G7, try and find it on sale, get it for cheap. A couple of other lenses are going to be a way better option for you. But if this is something where this is maybe your second or your third camera and you're really debating between these, let's walk through a few different scenarios. One, you're a vlogger. You're planning to use the camera for a vlog. I will say if you can afford it, get the G85. A couple of big reasons. One is that in-body image stabilization means slightly smoother shots when you're walking around and talking to your camera and doing, stuff like this. It's not going to completely remove it. It's not a handheld motorized gimbal, but it does take the edge off it, which is kind of handy, especially when you start upgrading to later lenses, like the 7-14 on here or this 15mm. You end up, they don't have image stabilization. Having that little bit can be nice to just smooth out shots. But the other reason is that the kit lens that comes with the G85 is a 12mm to 60mm, whereas the G7 you get a 14 to 42mm. And 12mm is a nice chunk wider than 14mm. And vlogging is all about that wide angle lens so that it's not always just like a close crop of your face, but you're actually showing off a little bit of the world around you as you're interacting with it. And the 14mm on the G7, especially if you shoot in 4K, which crops it a little bit more, you end up, it's a struggle to put two people in there unless you've got like a nice big tripod like this and long arms. You can really like hold it away from yourself. But this one also zooms more, and it's got power optical image stabilization as opposed to just the mega optical image stabilization in the G7's kit lens. So if you can afford it, get the G85. But if you can't, don't worry about it. I did tons of vlogs with the G7. It's a fantastic camera. It worked. You got to learn it. I've got a settings video. It's really handy and helpful. But if you're a vlogger, try and get the G85. If you can't, don't worry about it. If you're a photographer, and again, I'm not saying a beginning photographer, if you're just getting into photography and you're looking at this as kind of your first like mirrorless or digital SLR, just get the G7 and then find the cheap 25mm f1.7 lens to go along with the kit lens, and you're gonna have a lot of fun and learn tons of stuff. And the in-body image stabilization won't really matter, and the redesigned shutter mechanism won't really matter. But if you are a semi-professional or even a professional photographer, or you get paid money, here's what I like about the G85. One, that in-body image stabilization, when you know what you're doing, can let you shoot some really sharp shots at some really slow shutter speeds, which is pretty handy. I was shooting at 100mm, which is a 200mm equivalent. The rule is I should have been at 1/200th of a second. I was shooting sharp at like 1/4 of a second. Like, that's a long time for a shutter to be open, but the image stabilization in this works really, really handy. So that part is nice. They've also redesigned the shutter mechanism so that it's smoother and quieter and less jarring. The G7s, they said, I never noticed it, but that it could lead to not as sharp shots because it was hitting so hard. So this one is a little bit smoother, and that can be handy. Nice thing about these cameras is you can shoot silently with the electronic shutter, but if you don't love the electronic shutter so much, this shutter is a good chunk quieter than the shutter on the G7. So photographers, I would say, yeah, try and get to the G85. If you're just starting out, the G7 is going to be fine, because even the in-body image stabilization that makes these sharper photos, if your subject is moving, it doesn't matter whether you're stabilized or not. So yeah, but I'm really enjoying this for photos. I enjoyed my G7 for photos too, though. Different than a full frame, but handy. Photographers on the higher end, try and get the G85. Last one, videographers. Like, you make films, you're not just a vlogger, but you like making films. Unless you've got a pile of money, for you guys, I would say get the G7. Here's why is, for me, the thing that makes films and cinematography interesting is not like a little bit smoother shots from the 5-axis image stabilization. it's getting a beautiful piece of glass like a 25mm 1.4 and really blurring out that background and, you know, being a little bit more cinematic. The other thing too is, like, if you're serious about making films, you can pay hundreds of dollars more for the G85, or you could buy even probably a $50 stabilizer off Amazon, like a little passive stabilizer, do the work to balance it, and you're going to get smoother shots that way. If you're a vlogger, you don't have time, or you're not balancing gimbals or doing that, but if you're into making cinema or, you know, films, then the G7 is going to be just fine because you've got lots of other accessories. You're going to get a slider, you're going to get that handheld stabilizer, and honestly, the in-body image stabilization isn't always perfectly smooth, especially when you're like panning or you're doing these rises or things. It's really focused on trying to keep things locked, but when you start moving it around, it'll kind of judder and catch up, and you don't want that in cinematography. So even if you're using the G7 or you're using this, you're probably going to turn off a lot of that image stabilization on your lenses, on your cameras, and use something else. And the video quality between the two is, I don't know, it looks exactly the same to me. I haven't really done a deep dive into it, but they both shoot 4K, 100 megabit per second. They're both shooting the same 1080p data rates, so it's going to be very, very, very similar, and you're not going to take advantage of that. Sure, this one is weather sealed. Okay, maybe throw a plastic bag over the G7. I took it in a lot of not great weather and it was still okay. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about the upgrade so much. I would take that money and put it into some great lenses for cinematography or some accessories to go with it. I think that's hopefully helpful to you guys. Again, starting out, don't worry about it. There's so much other stuff to learn. Just get the G7, get a couple of like fast prime lenses. But if you're getting a little bit more serious, I would say for vloggers, yeah, the G85, if you can swing it, do it. The lens is better. That in-body image stabilization is good. For serious photographers, yes, do it. You're going to enjoy that in-body image stabilization, that quieter shutter. And then for cinematographers, filmmakers, you're a little bit more into that, just get the G7. Well, you know, or you'd probably be close to a GH4, which you may like that as well. I'm Justin Rivas. Hopefully that was helpful.